Hi, my name is Mello, and I'm with the Sacramento History Museum here again for Museum Mondays. Welcome! And today, once again, I'm going to tell you a story. And this story is kind of nice this time of year, thinking about when we're thinking about how bad things might be for us. Well, this story is called It Could Always Be Worse by Margot Zemock. And it begins with those 4 words that I love to start a story with. Once upon a time. There was a poor, unfortunate man who lived with his wife, his 6 children, and his mother, all together in one small one-room hut. Oh my goodness, it was so crowded and it was so noisy. All day long, the children would argue and complain and quarrel with each other, and the mother, she complained all night long. And the poor wife, she just cried. It was so miserable. Well, finally, one day, the poor unfortunate man could not stand it any longer. He decided to go into the village to ask the rabbi, the wise elder of the village, for some advice to help him. So off he went to the village. Wise elder, things are in a bad way for me, and they are getting worse. You see, my wife, my 6 children, my mother, and I all live together in one small hut, and it's so crowded, it's so noisy with quarreling and crying and complaining all of the time. Help me, elder. I will do whatever you ask. And the wise elder stroked his gray, long beard, and he said, Well, my good man, let me ask you a few questions first. Do you happen to have any animals? Chicken, perhaps? Oh, yes, I do. I have a chicken, a rooster, and a goose. Well, then here is what I want you to do. I want you to go home and take the chicken, the rooster, and the goose out of the shed and into the hut to live with you. Well, the poor man was very confused by that bit of advice. He had never thought that he would hear such news, but he went home and did exactly as he was told, for after all, he was the wisest man in the village. So he went home and he took the chicken, the rooster, and the goose out of the shed and into the hut to live with him. After some days and a week went by, life in the little hut was even worse than before. As you can imagine, someone is trying to call. As you can imagine, it was even worse than before. Now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining, there was honking and crowing and clucking, and there were feathers everywhere to be found, even in his soup. Well, after some weeks and a day went by, the poor unfortunate man, he could not stand it any longer. He went back to the wisest man in the village and he said, Oh, wise elder, see what a misfortune has befallen me. You see, now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining, there's honking and crowing and clucking, and there's feathers in my soup. Help me, please. It couldn't be worse. Again with a long beard. Well, let me ask you this. Do you happen to have a goat? Yes, I have a goat. He's an old goat, though. He's not worth much money. Ah, good. Then this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home and take the goat out of the shed and into the hut to live with you. The goat? Do you mean it? Yes, I mean it exactly. Do exactly as I say and do it right away. So the poor unfortunate man went home now with this piece of advice. His head was hanging low. But who was he to question? The wisest man in the village. So he went home and he took the goat out of the shed and into the hut to live with him. Well, as you can imagine, life in the little hut was even worse than before. Now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining and the honking and the crowing and the clucking, the goat was running around pushing and butting everybody and eating everything in sight, including the curtains and the tablecloth. Oh, after only a few days went by, the poor unfortunate man, he could not stand it any longer. The kids were getting bigger and louder and noisier, and there was hardly any room to breathe. He went back to the wisest man in the village. Wise elder, please help me. My life is a nightmare. Now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining and the honking and the crowing and the clucking, the goats with the pushing and the butting and eating everything in sight. Please, it just couldn't be worse. Do you happen to have a cow? Yes, I have a cow. Ah, good. Then here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home and take the cow into the hut to live with you. Surely not the cow. Do exactly as I say and do it right away. And so the poor unfortunate man, he headed home with his head hanging low. And he was going to do exactly as the wise elder had told him, but he began to think that perhaps the wisest man in the village was also a little bit crazy. But he did as he was told. He took the cow out of the shed and into the hut to live with him. Now you can imagine what that household was like now. Now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining and the honking and the crowing and the clucking and the goat with the pushing and the butting and eating everything in sight. The cow trampled everything and everywhere. The cow was everywhere they were. There was no room to sit. There was no room to stand. There wasn't enough room to breathe even. The poor unfortunate man, he could not stand it one single night. He went back to the wisest man in the village and he said, "Wise elder, the end of the world has surely come. You must understand. Now with the crying and the quarreling and the complaining and the honking and the crowing and the clucking and the goat with the pushing and the butting and eating everything in sight, the cow is trampling everything I own. There's not enough room to breathe in this house. Please. It's worse than a nightmare." Well, then I think this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home and take the chicken, the rooster, the goose, the goat, the cow out of the hut and into the shed where they belong. Do you mean it? Do you mean what you say? Do you mean it? Because I will do it right away. And that poor unfortunate man, he ran home as fast as he could and he took the cow and the goat and the chickens and the rooster and the goose all out of the hut and back into the shed where they should be. And that night, it was so quiet. It was so peaceful. Everybody got along. There was no crying. There was no quarreling. There was no complaining. It was just peace and love. And there were no feathers in his soup. So the next morning, the poor unfortunate man, he went back to the wisest man in the village. And he said, "Wise elder, thank you. Now with my wife, my 6 children, and my mother and I, all in our hut, oh, there's so much room. There's plenty of room for everyone. We all get along. Everyone is happy. It's so peaceful. And now I understand that no matter how bad it gets, it could always be worse." So that's our story for today. I hope you'll join us again on Museum Monday next week when we look at the Victorian traditions surrounding Christmas. So I hope to see you all then. Thank you.